This is the Ultra Culture Podcast, and I'm calling this the first episode of the podcast, the first episode of Season 3 that is kicking off 2019. And I know what you're thinking. You're probably thinking, where have you been? We haven't gotten an episode of the podcast in, what has it been, 3 months now? Yes, it's true. So rumors of my disappearance have been greatly exaggerated. People have been emailing me saying, what happened? Did you just disappear on us? Did you just run out on us? Don't worry. I'm here. I've been here the whole time. I've just been a little bit quiet. In fact, I've been on what I've been telling people is a kind of monastic retreat, a magical retreat, if you will. These are really important to do sometimes. What I've done is just gone quiet for a bit and just put a massive amount of effort and focus into mapping out actually kind of the next 10 years of my plan, both business plan and life plan, and how I can serve you at the absolutely highest level and just take it up, dial up the volume as much as possible. And that's what I've been doing. And if you were in my apartment, you would be able to see that there is a, no joke, a 5-foot by 16-foot giant piece of paper with tiny scrawl on it, just covering every single inch of it in, 7-point computer font, mapping out everything that I've got to do in my life and how I can bring it all together and how that I can make everything that I'm bringing to you massively better, whether it's ultra culture or magic.me or some new things to come. So you might want to ask yourself, what have I been cooking up? What might be coming in the next few months, within the next year and beyond? What might be coming in the next few weeks? It's a mystery. But if it took 3 months and that much effort and brain power to cook up, mad Elon Musk style, I wonder what it might be. Well, while you're thinking about that, today, right now, as you're listening, I have an amazing treat for you. This is somebody that I've wanted to have on the podcast for actually since the beginning. His name is Douglas Rushkoff. Many of you probably know him. He is one of the foremost, if not the foremost, in fact, let's just say he is the foremost media theorists in the world. In fact, not just media theorist, but he's been named one of the world's 10 most influential intellectuals by MIT. And he's an award-winning author, broadcaster, and documentarian who studies human autonomy in the digital age. He hosts the Team Human podcast, which is amazing, and I really, really recommend you check out. I actually was on an episode talking about John Dee and artificial intelligence, and obviously recommend you check that one out. But check out the whole podcast. It's a really, really incredible source of information and wisdom. I've been a fan of Doug Rushkoff since I was a teenager when I read his books Siberia and Playing the Future and Ecstasy Club, which were about that moment in time where rave culture and psychedelic culture and alternative spirituality met the birth of the internet. Rushkoff was right there as this whole new psychedelic vista opened up. He was actually, around Timothy Leary when Timothy Leary was evangelizing the internet as, the next big thing. Leary famously said that the internet would be, the next LSD and that it would open up consciousness for a completely new generation. And that's definitely happened, but we've had some good trips and some bad trips since that happened. Over his unstoppable career, Doug Rushkoff has written 20 books, including the bestsellers Present Shock and Program or Be Programmed. He's written regular columns for Medium, CNN, The Daily Beast, and The Guardian. And he's also made the famous PBS Frontline documentaries, which you might have seen, Generation Like and Merchants of Cool. He actually coined the phrases viral media and social currency. So if you've ever heard anyone say, or if you work in a job or in a profession, particularly a creative one, where somebody has said, make it go viral, just make it go viral. you can thank Doug Rushkoff for the original concept behind that. Of course, people didn't quite understand it properly, but the idea of viral media is a phrase that he coined. He's also been a leading voice for applying digital media towards social and economic justice. And he's a research fellow at the Institute for the Future and founder of the Laboratory for Digital Humanism at CUNY Queens, where he's a professor of media theory and digital economics. Oh, with a resume like that, you know we're going to have an amazing conversation. Now, Doug really is one of the foremost thinkers of our age, and I've been lucky enough to know him, and been able to meet him and speak with him several times. Actually, going back to my early 20s when I was working at Disinformation and hanging out with Genesis Peerage, and Doug was in the mix, and Doug, even when I was just that kind of young punk kid, Doug was always very kind and encouraging to me, and treated me with a lot of compassion. And I've never forgotten that, because, I was somebody that he couldn't get anything from. I was just some kid, right? And I've never forgotten that. And I've never forgotten the kind of the confidence boost that gave me to be hanging out with my hero, one of my heroes, my mini heroes at that time, whether it was Doug or Genesis Peerage or Grant Morrison, who I was all able to meet at this time. People that I consider to be on the cutting edge of culture, who were developing this vision for what was possible for humanity, what digital media was making possible for humanity, what new forms, what new psychedelic forms were going to emerge. And of course, this was the heyday of ecstasy-fueled raver optimism. And that was great. It was great. I mean, I wish it would come back. And luckily, it's always there if you want to access it. That, total optimism for the future of humanity. All that it takes is tuning into the right channel. And I'm doing my best to make this podcast that channel if you tune into it. And of course, Doug's podcast, Team Human, is that channel. So turn off the doom and gloom channels and the end of the world and the fascism and the craziness and the insanity and all of the negative media viruses that are out there, and tune in, turn on, and show up. Don't drop out. That's from the past, but show up. And as Tim Leary says, let's say, and as Doug says, actually on the back cover of his new book, Team Human, find the others. This is what Tim Leary always told people to do. First, you activate yourself, and then you find the others. Now, Doug has a new book out, and I'm holding it right now. It's called Team Human, and it is a hardcover, red-covered manifesto. It's like Rushkoff's little red book, and this is Doug at his best. It is something that will just hit you in the head with its message about where we're headed in the future, and it's thick enough and heavy enough that you could literally hit somebody in the head with it, and then hopefully they'll read it, and then they'll be hit in the head twice. If I were to summarize it, it's a manifesto about where digital technology has brought us to and where it could take us to if we're not careful. And this is no holds barred. Doug, as we actually talk about in the interview, has always been, the optimist. He's always been, not always, but in many times, in many books and many articles that he's written, he's been almost unabashedly optimistic about what digital media can do. And he was, of course, one of the early voices saying, wow, the internet could radically change humanity for the better. This book surveys the reality of where we're at. It's not quite so optimistic, at least until the very end. He doesn't pull any punches here. He lays out the damage that digital media has done to the world, some of the side effects and secondary effects and knock-on effects of our blind rush into, nonstop digital capitalism and digital imperialism. And then, of course, he offers a different vision by the end of how things could be. So I'm just going to read the description of the book, and you'll get a great idea of exactly what we have ahead of us here. So here it is. Autonomous technologies, runaway markets, and weaponized media have overturned civil society, paralyzing our ability to connect meaningfully or act purposefully. Everyone is asking how we got here as if this were a random slide toward collective incoherence and disempowerment. It is not. There's a reason for our current predicament, an anti-human agenda embedded in our technology, our markets, and our major cultural institutions from education and religion to civics and media. It has turned them from forces for human connection and expression into ones of isolation and repression. But it doesn't have to be this way. In Team Human, Doug Rushkoff argues that we are capable of not only transcending the paralyzing effects of these institutions, but reconnecting with one another and remaking society toward human ends rather than the end of humans. A sweeping treatise, Team Human is comprised of 100 digestible passages detailing the history of our relationships with language, media, money, religion, politics, and technology, lucidly rendering our tenuous union with each other with each today. Rushkoff recasts evolution from the myth of survival of the fittest to the reality of collaboration. If humans are the most advanced species, Rushkoff writes, it is because we've developed the most advanced ways of working together. Yet, the very mechanisms we've developed to enhance our connectivity from language to computers have left human social nature behind. The internet is just the latest of these advances, an unprecedented opportunity for human connection that has been developed instead into an environment biased toward extraction and distrust. Humans have gone from being the conscious users of technology to the passive objects. On the Internet of Things, Rushkoff explains, we humans are the things. He exposes the roots of the anti-human philosophy informing both Wall Street and Silicon Valley alike, treating people as the problem and technology as the solution. Instead of unleashing the wild possibilities of the human imagination, we end up using technology to make people behave more consistently with their algorithmically derived consumer profiles. As a result, people accept technology's priorities as our own. We measure human beings in terms of utility value, speed, and efficiency over the creativity, novelty, and rapport that make us truly human. Relying on data and analytics, we treat the future as inevitable rather than something we create together in the present. We see people with contrary opinions as adversaries to conquer rather than humans with whom to engage. Incapable of establishing genuine rapport with each other online, we blame one another rather than our machines. Team Human seeks to liberate us from this conundrum by celebrating our humanity and redefining being human as a team sport. Instead of rejecting technology, Rushkoff asks that we embed human values into our digital future. He shows how the blockchain will never substitute for human trust, and artificial intelligence can never supplant human consciousness. Instead, we must restore the primacy of real-world, face-to-face, eye-to-eye contact in everything from education and business to romance and diplomacy. Rushkoff also shares practical solutions for building solidarity into digital platforms, cooperative ownership into business plans, and compassion into policy debates. We must learn to find the others, not just those with whom we agree, but those who we believe are on the other side. It's time for human beings to intervene on our own behalf. We are not the competing individuals we've come to believe we are. We are Team Human. Now, does that sound great or great? So this book is amazing. It's a short read. You can read it in 1 or 2 sittings, and it will remind you of everything that you've forgotten about, all the optimism that we brought into the digital age, and all of the optimism that we need to muster to go forward, to build a better future. Because as I firmly believe, machines are there to serve us, and unfortunately, as Doug points out in this book, it's kind of flip-flopped a bit, and we kind of find ourselves in this role of serving the machines or serving the algorithms, whether they're Google algorithms or Facebook algorithms or, providing human data for training artificial intelligences, which is what so much of our activity online and on our phones is doing right now, whether you're aware of that or not. That's really the case. Machines are there to serve us, and they're only as good as the values that we put into them. And that's where I truly believe, truly from the core of my being, that spirituality is crucial to surviving the 21st century, and not just surviving, but thriving, building a future and a planet better than ever before, where we solve some of the hugest challenges facing humanity, whether it's grappling with the existential risk of AI, or it's dealing with climate change, or global poverty, or ending human trafficking. These are all things that these hyper-advanced technologies can assist us to do. But it takes the human will, it takes the human values to do it. So I think it's really fortuitous and actually not a mistake that I'm reopening the Ultra Culture podcast with episode 1 of season 3 with Doug Rushkoff. If I were to define my mission statement going forward, whether it's this podcast or my books or the things that I do online, it's really that. It's bringing a sense of spirituality and ethics and wisdom and compassion to the digital age that we find ourselves in, because that's what we need. If we're going to be in an arms race of technology and an AI arms race that's happening all over the world, then we need spirituality and wisdom to catch up and be just as powerful, more powerful, be a guiding light, a guiding force in the world, so that this human project stays on the rails and goes in a better and better direction all the time, instead of derailing into chaos and disorder and catastrophe. That's really how I see my role in the world right now. And for me right now going forward, the way that I communicate that is not as important as getting that across. So in the past, of course, I focused on things like magic and shamanism and things like that. But for me, those are really vehicles, right? And I want to make that really clear. Those are vehicles to communicate what I'm trying to say, which is wake up and make the world a better place, right? So in the past, I've gotten a little frustrated because I felt like I was kind of getting bogged down a little bit in the baggage of what people associate with, shamanism and magic and things like that, and not hearing what I was trying to say. So this is really what I want to communicate forcefully going forward. It's not so much about the specifics of, the specific disciplines and things like that. Those are all things that I'm offering and that I'm going to continue to offer. But what we need to do right now, by any other name and by any other method, is wake up and make the world a better place and bring some compassion and clarity and wisdom to the world we're building. We've had the technology to destroy the world many times over since the end of World War II. And as artificial intelligence continues to ramp up and things like autonomous weapons and bioweapons and nanoweapons and all of this heats up, all you have to do is go online and think about how that's going to combine with the current state of people's consciousness while we're developing these technologies that have the potential to be ultra weapons. What are we seeing the dialogue as online? Hatred, anger, polarization, the rebirth of totalitarian ideologies from any end of the political spectrum, just the pure emotional nastiness of people just attacking each other online. I wonder if there's any connection between the fact that people were raised on, computers and gaming devices, playing simulations where they're killing and destroying people, and then using them to consume hardcore pornography. And then they're using the exact same device to communicate with other human beings and not doing it civilly. I wonder if there's some type of psychological connection there, without starting to sound, dad mode, although whatever, I'm going to embrace it. If I sound dad mode going forward, so be it. We need some adult supervision here. Okay. So long ramble, but I wanted to get that off my chest and reconnect with you and be right on the same page with you, because I have been in the lab with a pen and a pad for the last 3 months, and I'm back, and this is where I'm at. It's where I've always been at. But sometimes we need to take a moment, take a breather to reconnect and refocus on core mission. And by the way, is there somewhere in your life where you could do that? I think everyone should. Is that a challenge that you could take on? What could you do even in a weekend if you took a weekend to really sit down, even just with a notebook and just map out, okay, where am I? Where have I been? What do I truly want to do with my life? What are all the areas of my life that I need to attend to? Am I fully showing up in those? What do I really want? Because it's so easy in our world to get derailed and bogged down by to-do lists, by, all the constant stimuli that comes at us, whether it's from social media or email or push notifications on our phone or Instagram or bosses, demanding things from us, or friends demanding things, or family demanding things. It's so easy to get derailed from what you truly want, from what you truly want to be doing. So that's my challenge to you. Can you take a weekend and do a mini refocus and reorientation? Now, that's where we're at. And by the way, magic.me is still humming along and growing and thriving. We're doing the bi-weekly office hours, and those have grown and expanded. I mean, the last one that I did was something like 3 or 4 hours long. And I've shifted focus a bit. Instead of just fielding questions, I'm taking some time, in some cases 1 or 2 hours per person, to work with them and really dig into what they want to be doing in life and helping them reorient towards their highest, potential. Because so often we just get cluttered with blocks. And so that's been a really, really rewarding and powerful process, honestly, working with people one-on-one and getting down to the core of things instead of just focusing on surface level techniques. I mean, look, you can go anywhere. You can read books on spirituality. You can go to other teachers, things like that. They'll teach you, the basics. You can learn. Of course, you won't get the distinctions of someone who's been practicing it so long, but the information's there. What we want to get to is in terms of your true will or your true reason for being, and how can we get to that as quickly as possible so that you can be the best person you can possibly be now, not in 20 years, not in, after, decades of practice and research, but now, because we don't have time for that anymore. All right. There's too much stuff going on in the world. The stakes are too high. We need your best self now, right? We need you to show up and play fully. And that's what I've been doing with the office hours. So that's, of course, available to all subscribers at magic.me. And there's, of course, 60 hours of training, and it's growing. And oh boy, there might be some amazing things coming there. Not just the podcast, but of course, let's not say might be, there are some amazing things coming, as I've hinted at for a long time, but they're becoming even better and better as I build them. Okay, so that's magic.me, magic with a K, and I will spare you from any further ramble. Okay, with no further ado, please welcome the legendary Douglas Rushkoff. How's it going, Doug?
All right. I'm just doing a lot of media.
Yeah. Thank you so much for.
You know how this goes.
Yeah, I'm sure you're backed or booked back to back, as it were.
Yeah, but I wrote a much shorter book than you did.
Well, the book is amazing. I just finished it. It's really, really, really good.
Thanks. It's less detailed, though, right?
Well, it packs a heavy punch.
I gotta say. Good.
Yeah, seriously.
I'm sure you see all the sort of sigillion efforts in this one.
Yes, it reminds me. I'm sure this is intentional, but it reminds me a bit of it's Rushkoff's Little Red Book, like Mao's Little Red Book.
Yeah, that's why I wanted it smaller. I wanted it to be like, and that's why I wrote it. So it was so hard. I spent so much time just trying to reduce the word count so that it could be in like the form factor of program or be programmed, a nice little thing. But then, as is what they do, the publishers, I guess, is they always want it to look bigger so they could like make sure people don't feel like they're being cheated out of a whole book. So they turned my little novella. Now it looks like, oh, it's a book again. But at least they let me do it without a dust jacket. So it's got some sort of distinct object value.
Yeah, it's got a lot of heft, in a in both senses. It seems like a amazing object, and it also kind of hits you in the face with the message of it. But I guess you were going for like something that people could carry in their back pocket, like on campuses and that type of thing.
For the hip college student who would have read like Siddhartha or something when I was a kid, it would be their little like I was thinking a package like Catcher in the Rye, sort of like a small recognizable, and I wanted nothing on it but like the Team Human logo.
Okay.
And then that would be it. Just like the secret things that would just like you'd see it in the store. You wouldn't know what it is, so you'd go open it.
Well, the cool thing I think is it probably will be the type of book that, kids who would have read Siddhartha read, but because of how it's packaged, it'll last them for the rest of their life, and they'll be able to have it on their coffee table, for decades to come.
That's true. Oh, I could have pitched them on the idea that people are going to have to replace, if we do it smaller, they're going to wear it out and have to replace it, whereas this one's going to last too long.
Yeah. Definitely. Well, I see it's number one in sociology right now. It's doing really, really well.
I know, and the sociology professor at CUNY emailed me and said, you're not a media studies professor, you're a sociologist. I was like, okay. I never really knew totally what sociology was, but I always thought it had way more to do with like numbers and, mass populations than weirdness. But I guess there's a...
Did you say what he meant in terms of you're a sociologist? It was just a...
He claimed me.
Well, that's always good, right?
Yeah, that's fine. I'll take it. I'll take it.
Nice. Well, reading the book, it seems to me it's almost like this very comprehensive statement where, of course I've been a huge fan of everything you've been doing for more than 20 years now. And so reading your stuff along the way, it seems like this book in one sense is like brings together and just very forcefully punches forward with what you've been trying to say for quite a while. And it's just almost like a forceful summation of your thinking. At the same time, while it is a hopeful book, it's hard not to see there's a lot of, there's a lot of struggling with the state that the world is in right now and the state that digital media has ended up in and the internet. And I was reading this, and while I was reading it, thinking back to, reading Siberia or Playing the Future when I was a teenager, which were, full of unbridled optimism for the future of the internet. And, I remember at that time reading these books saying, wow, these are kind of the first things that I've read that say that digital media is good. Even the idea that video games might be good for kids, when everything else I was seeing in the media at the time, like Time Magazine and Newsweek were constantly running shock articles on how bad digital media would be for kids. In retrospect, maybe they were right, but I don't know. Maybe it seems like, there's a struggle here maybe in the book between your need to be optimistic about the future and the reality of where we find ourselves right now.
Yeah. I mean, it's not a need to be optimistic about the future. I mean, It's more, I guess, just trying to imagine a path through which this could happen. It's funny because I was looking at the end of Siberia, and at the end of Siberia, I it's weird. I had this whole long section on the Mondo 2000 house and what was all going on there when they were making that magazine. And somehow Queen Mu, who was, one of the co-founders of Mondo, got a hold of that and was like threatening to sue. And she said that this is all going to be used against us, and the CIA is already tapping our phones.
Oh, no.
And, it was like a whole giant paranoid, tarantula venom tirade with giant facts that she sent. And then the publisher wanted me to soften and take out a bunch of stuff. And I used that as an opportunity because just before the book was being published is when Wired magazine came out. And I kind of said, that if this kind of neo-psychedelic, pagan, Gaian, Mondo-driven world kind of, is going to implode on itself. And the sort of paranoia that there's a bright little newcomer willing to recontextualize our whole countercultural revolution as, a business, as a new landscape for corporate capitalism, and if we don't watch out, this is going to become, the Wired story rather than the Mondo story. So I was even then I was worried about, if we play this fast and loose and this sort of undisciplined, if we allow kind of undisciplined psychedelic paranoia to guide our path forward, we're going to no longer be at the helm of this social renaissance. And we did, and we're not, so sometimes it's easy to blame them, easy to blame the Wall Street Journal, whoever it was that took over, and the venture capitalists and capitalism. But it's also because we early participants didn't realize how we were challenging the existing political economy of media and the political economy of reality, but by not realizing that, that's how we let rave turn into another thing that could be sold at the mall, or how we let the internet become, what it became.
Yeah, speaking of which, I almost cheered out loud when I saw you slipped plur into the book about 3/4 of the way through. I haven't seen that in a long time.
I figured only certain people would, and that's the way the whole book is, where there are nods. So there'll be a nod to McLuhan or a nod to Aleister Crowley, or, when I just say, instead we could be treating each other with peace, love, unity, and respect. It's like everybody who knows went, oh, I know where he comes from. But that way I don't have to say, as the ravers would tell us, because once you say that, then you're almost like discrediting the idea for those who have, prejudice against that whole movement.
So you bring up this moment of, you said psychedelic paranoia. Do you think that was actually the shift happened because of something that was not done in the underground, or was it just inevitable? It seems to me, at least in retrospect, that it is just inevitable that the internet would have been used for, would have been commercialized. And, you bring up the point many times in the book that, the internet became the new frontier for imperialism, and that now our minds and our social relations are the new frontier for imperialism. And you even say at one point that, which I love, it's a shocking statement, that we'll be implanting and injecting the code of capitalism into our blood. So I'm wondering if this is just kind of inevitable in a way, or if it kind of surprises me to hear you say that there was a moment of psychedelic paranoia and it could have gone another way. Do you think that's actually the case?
Well, I think we did make some crucial errors. And one of them was succumbing to the very sort of American colonial frontier mentality. We thought that we were part of a discontinuity, like there was some unprecedented thing that was happening, that it was, virgin soil. And that's a very American, framework to have. And what it meant was that we really weren't looking at the past. We were tending to look almost with blinders on straight at the future. Don't look back, no agenda, don't worry, just keep going forward, touch. Let's, pedal to the metal, that if we don't achieve escape velocity, we won't make it. And the only way to achieve escape velocity is to promote chaos. And I mean chaos in the good way, that you promote enough turbulence so the system raises to another state. And I think that meant that we didn't really look back. We didn't retrieve old repressed human values and then rebirth them in a new context. We just were looking ahead, and that was this kind of, Gnostic, pre-transhumanist kind of, cosmist journey out of body through, like Terence would tell us, let's, rise above the chrysalis of matter into pure consciousness, and that marks a discontinuity rather than it's still escaping from something, kind of, rather than investing in our reality. And I think it was a West Coast problem too, because the West Coast was sort of the end of colonialism, and the West Coast felt responsible for figuring out, well, how do we push this pseudopod in a new direction? What is the new thing? Rather than looking back and saying, all right, how do we repair from slavery and all of these social injustices? And, it was a lot of it was, a bunch of white kids trying to escape from the crimes of their parents.
You make the point during the book that what we really need to do is go back and reclaim values that have been forgotten. This is something I've been thinking about a lot recently, and a lot actually, particularly as the baby boomers get older. I've just been thinking about the human experience, and one of the real core flaws, I think, in the human experience is the inability, or not the inability, but the inefficiency of the transfer of wisdom from one generation to the next. It's like, because just the way that human beings are, when we grow up, we don't want to listen to our parents. It's almost like a cliche. And then by the time we realize, oh, wait, maybe other people might have gone through all the same issues and might have something to say to me, then it's almost too late or too late. And this is one of the reasons why I think that ancestor worship in other cultures is so interesting in a way. But this idea of going back and reclaiming values, I mean, kind of what you're talking about now. And it seems to me like one of the core fears in this book is, I think you even mention at one point, you imply that pretty soon we're going to be in a world where all of this, you mentioned that we who remember how it was before the world became this digital casino, have a particular responsibility to bring some type of values and awareness into it. And at one point, fairly soon in the grand scheme of things, there's not going to be anyone on the planet that doesn't remember the world before the internet.
Right. And it's a very particular internet too. It's not an internet that's like, video gaming where you decide to play a game and, log on to your console and find your little Fortnite buddies. It's this, being online as a state of being. And that is different. That's as different as electricity or something, or even, we could argue as text, or maybe even as language itself. And I've been thinking a lot about these technologies as drugs, and that's part of why the psychedelic subculture was such an interesting place for the internet to be developed, because these were people who were used to, thinking makes it so, who were used to confronting their own hallucinations. There was there was sort of a legacy of that, and I feel like they were potentially better guardians of this than everyone now is living in this, almost pseudo psychedelic substrate of the internet, without an awareness of how their set and their setting really determine the nature of the trip. Oh, wow. So we've got all of America is having this sort of bad trip, living on psychedelics without even knowing they're on the drug.
Oh man, that's very well put. It's interesting. Just I'm thinking as you're saying this, all the presuppositions that Steve Jobs put into the Mac operating system that he took from LSD and mysticism, are kind of the trip we've all been living in ever since. But it's interesting also, as you're talking about this, it reminds me, of course, that, Tim Leary in the 90s was saying that the internet information would be the new acid for the 90s and going forward. And now, as we bring up in your book, we have companies literally doing everything they can to make these apps and user experiences addictive, video games and feedback loops. And I do think it's a new form of drugs. And, all you have to do is, you mentioned Fortnite, all you have to do is watch people play Fortnite for hours on end, or any other game with an infinite feedback loop, or play those, and you'll understand, particularly if you have experience of substances, that it's really the same thing.
Right. And then it is up to you to be aware of. It's not to say that drugs are bad, but that you just have to be aware when you're taking one, and to know why you're taking it. As Leary used to say, before you take a drug, look into the eyes of someone who's on that drug and decide if that's a place you want to be. And I don't think people are doing that. They're not even going online consciously. And this is not to say that just the internet is a drug like that. You go to any monastery, as I know you have now, and you'll run into people who are not. They're on a silence, whatever that's called, like a silence retreat, where they don't speak for a week or a month. And you think, well, why aren't they speaking for a week or a month? It's not because of some ego thing that, I'm going to be quiet so that the world doesn't have to hear the sound of my voice. No, it's because they understand that language is itself a drug, that your mind, your consciousness on English is different than your consciousness off English. So they want to go off that software, off that operating system, in order to behold a reality without, this distinction between nouns and verbs and subjects and objects. There's so many built-in biases about our world in the languages that we use to understand it. And so it goes back to that, or to text, or to TV, or to radio, or anything. It's not just the net that's a drug. The only difference is the net will reconfigure itself based on our reactions to it, our responses. So, unlike television, which, it's slowly, like maybe every quarter or every year, they can upgrade their style of, social programming based on consumer responses to what they did. But it's not this real-time algorithmic, searching for exploits in the human psyche in order to use technology against us. And that's where it gets kind of occult, where we can, as I was just talking with Mark Pesce about this, we can really understand algorithms as demons. These are entities that we're programming to find our weaknesses and burrow into them in order to get us to act against our own best interests. That's a demon, right? That's kind of pure and simple.
Yeah. And the scary thing is, of course, with machine learning and evolutionary algorithms, is when the algorithms start recoding themselves and becoming more and more efficient in real time to do things that aren't in our best interests. And one point that you make really clearly in this book, in fact, it might be, one of the core themes of the book, if I'm reading it correctly, is the values that we put into these things. That's the issue. The technology itself isn't as much the issue as, I think you say at one point, that, we don't value each other. And that value system is going into these things and creating things like, these exploits that we're talking about, or addictive programs.
Exactly. It'd be one thing to not embed any values at all into our technologies, to just assume that they're neutral and kind of just build stuff and then see what it does. That would be kind of bad enough, because then you're at the mercy of the biases of the tech, which you may not know what they are until it's a little too late. So that's bad enough. But we're not just doing that. We're actually embedding the values of extractive, anti-human corporate capitalism into our devices. That's what we're doing. We're teaching our devices to extract data and attention and money from human beings by any means necessary. And that means compromising people's autonomy and cognition and agency. And that is pretty dark. And then we're doing it and locking away these embedded values in proprietary black box operating systems that we're not even allowed to see. So at least when values were embedded in the law, you could go read the law and say, hey, this law sucks. Look how oppressive they're being. And you could be consciously upset about it, even if you were powerless to change it because your government doesn't work. But this is, this is many levels more pernicious.
Yeah, that reminds me, I've often thought that about autonomous weapons also, in the same sense that, as awful and unimaginable as warfare and all the horror of existence on this planet has been for the last several thousand years, it's still humans doing it to each other. There's still, even if it's a completely damaged consciousness, there's still presumably something human on the other end of that can be reasoned with, that can show at least maybe a sliver of empathy. But when we get, and somebody has to make the decision to be violent, whereas with autonomous weapons, it's just, a piece of JavaScript or whatever these things run on. That's quite frightening to me, in the same way that you're talking about the algorithms.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, what I'm looking for are opportunities for human intervention in the machine, because everywhere there's a human, there's an opportunity to modulate or regulate or attenuate, some of the impact of these things. But most of the people are so afraid, they're afraid of getting in the way of this thing. And that's where, where Kevin Kelly's What Technology Wants book, even though I think it's completely wrong-headed, because he thinks technology has its own agenda. When I look at the title, What Technology Wants, I mean, I guess because I studied lots of Shakespeare in college, I think of it as what technology wants, and meaning like WONT, what it lacks, what it needs. And what technology wants is a genuine human agenda. What it wants is it doesn't have compassion. It doesn't have goals. It doesn't have agency. I mean, it can run autonomously, I guess, but it doesn't have a will. It doesn't have a consciousness. That's what it wants. And the only place it's going to get that is from humanity. And so, rather than worrying about what technology wants from us, we should think about, what do we want technology to do? And because we can't bring ourselves there, because we are like Kevin Kelly, looking at technology as some savior, we're thinking about sort of how technology treats us as if we're the objects rather than the subjects. It's a very passive, disempowered vantage point from which to engage with this stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like what you're saying is that the faulty code is predatory capitalism, and that it had tried to get frontier expansion, and now it's expanding to eat everything, and technology is allowing us to create fictional markets in a way, or ethereal markets to colonize. And you even talk about universal basic income as potentially a frontier for just continuing the extraction of whatever it is, human energy, human resources. And you use the phrase wetiko. I'm wondering if you can talk about that a bit.
Yeah, I got that from, there's this book called Columbus and the Cannibals, which is written by, I forgot his name now, but he's like the first Native American studies professor, scholar, and a Native American himself. And he wrote about how when Westerners, when Europeans came to the Americas, that, they would, tear down forests and just shoot everything and enslave people. And the Native Americans assumed that the Europeans had a disease, a spiritual disease that they called wetiko, which was like a human cannibalism, this sort of insatiable need to just destroy and colonize and enslave. And it did. I mean, I'm interested in that for a couple of reasons. One, because they didn't blame the humans. They thought that these people were sick, was deserving of care, not dying, which was interesting in itself. But but there's also the I guess the sense that we're with digital technology, we're extending that disease, that we've kind of we're inflicting this wetiko on ourselves. That this is really what, wetiko is another way of saying capitalism. Extract the value, suck the life out of this thing, be a vampire. And it was one thing when we would apply it to all the brown people of the world and take all their stuff and enslave them and, destroy nature and kill all the other species. And now it's finally waking us up to our own wetiko disease, is that we are doing it to ourselves. We've colonized our own minds now. So it's like, oh, this is what they meant. And I tell you, being the slave of Facebook is a whole lot easier than being a real slave. We're still, again, somehow incapable of looking back at the last 100 years, even, of the way we've treated Black people in this country to understand, don't you get it yet? So how much, it'll be interesting to see how much torture we need to inflict on ourselves before we develop compassion for those who we've been torturing right up till now.
Well, as you're saying this, it seems to me that, the great dream of the internet and the global village, as conceptualized by psychedelic people and spiritual people and Buddhist thinkers and that type of thing, was that it was going to do this. It was going to, because we became interconnected and saw each other and could be connected with everyone in the world instantaneously, that it would bring out this sense of understanding and compassion and, oh, that's what other people go through. But it seems to me that the opposite of what you just said, at least in some parts of the internet, seems to be happening, which is, of course, the resurgence of nationalism, the alt-right. What I see is people getting together and validating each other's pathological beliefs and then forming like cluster demons or new cults online, whether it's the incel thing or any of these new, kind of alt-right movements. So what do you think about that? Is that a regression? Is that, something becoming clear as it comes out in the wash, maybe?
First, I don't like the alt-right stuff. We also have to accept that there are versions of cultism across the political spectrum, where, all from what would the progressive side be, like the zeitgeist movement, and there's enough other, and neoliberalism itself. The way that boomers and NPR channels and all seem to worship the toxic philanthro capitalism of the Clinton Foundation or Gates and Buffett giving their billions back to Africa in techno-solutionist blunders where people take toxic mosquito nets and use them as fishing nets and destroy their fisheries. There's groupthink on, and I hate to quote Trump, but there's groupthink on both sides. That whether as evilly intended can be equally destructive. And that said, yeah. And that's partly, it's partly the exacerbation of what happens on the internet when you have all these programs designed to make you into a more extreme version of yourself than you are, to get you to react, more intensely. And, we all know the way that your next YouTube video, when you're watching, is always one notch worse than the one you just watched, until you go down the tunnel. You go into, one of Robert Anton Wilson's, you go into a reality tunnel. And, the beauty of his work was, to keep the lasagna flying. It was everything is true, it's all right. So if it's all true, then none of it's true, or it's like, let's just, chill here a minute. But I do think of a lot of what we're seeing as the last gasp. So, we are now coming to realize that nation states are not real. That nation states are this fabrication, and the mythologies on which nation states are based are not real. They're invented mythologies to make people from different cities believe that they're part of some same thing, some tribal mythological thing under some flag. And that's supposed to help them then dehumanize the people on the other side of the line. So we can either put up a fence and not let them have any food, or so that we can go invade them and kill them without thinking of them as an equivalent life form to ourselves. So when I see the way that nationalism now needs to be reinforced with a physical barrier, not to keep people out, but really just to reinforce this whole notion of a boundary line. This is my side of the line. I think of it, I almost have a positive feeling when I see that, only because I realize, wow, if that's what they're down to, it means the myth is almost completely gone,
Interesting. Well, it strikes me also that there's definitely, there's a lot of dehumanization with nationalism and with national boundaries and, all the wars and tribal fighting of all human history. But also now we have a new type of dehumanization on the other side, which is when we do live, as I think we inevitably will fairly shortly, in a one world community, the kind of global dehumanization, or the seeing of the world as one vast pool of just human resources. And, of course, with the coming of AI and machine learning and the, imminent displacement of so many people from their jobs, that's a really scary reality to start thinking about. You talk about Uber in the book, and how the Uber app is, which I never even thought of till I read it. It should have been obvious in retrospect, but that the Uber app is collecting data to send back to machine learning algorithms so that they can train autonomous cars to replace the Uber drivers. And one of your many, shocking lines in the book is that, humans' only real job is to make themselves obsolete.
Yeah. I mean, it is interesting, but if you look at, if the bias, if the intention of industrialism back from the 13 and 1400s was to get human beings out of the equation, to have them participate as little as necessary in the creation of value, so that you could find the poorest, least trained person and just plug them in 10 minutes into into the assembly line, then of course we're going to end up with technologies doing that same thing at whatever level we can imagine it. And so that's why I was going back, instead of asking Uber to participate in universal basic income, where they kind of pay a tax of revenue to people so then they could spend it at Uber again, or work for lower than minimum wage. That what if we did something more like universal basic assets? What if the drivers of Uber owned Uber? Then, even though they're doing the research and development for their own robot replacements, at least they'll own those robot replacements. Their sweat equity is an investment in the robot. So the robots they've taught are their pupils, their offspring. It's a very different way of understanding this imminent replacement. And the other question is, why is it necessarily good to have robots do things? I mean, I guess it's good if we still understand our work in terms of employment. Then it's better for robots to have jobs than people, because most people don't really want a job. They want stuff. They want to create value. But employment, again, it's another late Middle Ages invention from the beginning of the last Renaissance. Employment was what came after small business. Employment's what came after the chartered monopoly forced everyone to work for one of the king's favored companies instead of their own small business. And it wasn't about helping anything or promoting, more consumption or more a more efficient production of things. It was much more about trying to make, we're really trying to repress the rise of the middle class in the late medieval period. And now that we see, what happens when you digitize those same biases, you kill that same middle class. That's who suffers.
Yeah. Well, I'm really curious about your thoughts on AI and machine learning and automation and what you think is going to happen in the next couple decades. And it strikes me that actually talking about autonomous cars is a great place to start with that, just because it's the test case. It's the thing that's going to start impacting people's lives immediately in the physical world first, at least that they'll be aware of. It's funny that you mentioned the idea of Uber drivers having, owning their own stake in it. I was at a blockchain conference in Berlin last year, and they were talking about IOTA or one of these other blockchain technologies that's for transferring value between machines. And they were talking about the idea of self-owning cars, that in the future, the cars would be independent contractors and would be gathering their own, paying for their own gas money and finding shelter for the night, and making their own money. And there would be no humans involved in the capitalist equation at all, except for riders. I also saw I think the head of Lyft, the CEO of Lyft, speak in Las Vegas, I think 2 years ago. And he was saying that their vision for the future of autonomous vehicles is that everything will be autonomous within 10 years. And there will be no need to own a car whatsoever, that you'll just have a yearly Lyft subscription for $9,000 and you'll be able to hail a Lyft anywhere you are, anytime you want. And somebody asked him, well, what about all the Lyft drivers? Because, of course, all the people driving Lyft and Uber are people who have already been displaced in many cases from previous employment. And he said, well, what we want is to have human greeters in Lyft cars, and they'll be there to entertain you. And at first that sounded nice, like a rehumanization of this equation. And then on second thought, what planet are you living in? Like, who's going to want to be like an entertainer in a Lyft car? Who's going to want to be entertained by anybody in a Lyft car? And you mentioned a lot of the, it's like so weird. You mentioned the whole like delusion of tech moonshots of, these people coming out with TED Talks and saying, oh, don't worry, we're just going to create a new app or idea or device that will save the world. And kind of the infinite hubris of that kind of went all over the place there. But I'm curious what you think, maybe starting with autonomous vehicles in UBI and automation, and then progressing more and more into the AI future, what you think is going to happen from your vantage point.
I don't know. I do think, it's funny. I think it's very hard to predict trajectories when we've got climate change happening so rapidly and extremely. So I feel like I almost need to make predictions under the assumption that we do some of what's necessary to avoid species extinction, or to avoid at least, the annihilation of half or more of our species. And that would mean a Green New Deal of some kind. That would be not just national, but kind of a global Green New Deal, way beyond any kind of Paris Climate Accord. It would be, the humanity itself and all of our cities and localities deciding we have to deal with this in a distributed fashion, but also a coordinated one. And if we were to do that, then, things like, automotive travel are even called into question as it's sort of like the micro disruption of a particular industry, whether it's, truckers or taxi drivers or Walmart greeters or checkout cashiers kind of pales in comparison to this other collective challenge. So in order for us to meet any kind of green goal, we would have to change the whole nature of employment anyway. We can't have this many people producing and consuming on our planet, and stick around. It just doesn't add up, at least not without just such major technological shifts. So I think that the economic shift that needs to take place is one where employment is understood as a privilege, for those who get to actually have jobs of that kind, but public service and people working for and with each other is just a sort of an accepted part of life. And you know what I mean? It's like the shifts are so big that whether our vehicles are driven by humans or by computers is almost doesn't matter, because it's like, well, our cars are made by computers and robots instead of people now. They're marketed by big data algorithms now. So, the who you see behind the wheel of a vehicle, whether you own it or not, is different. I mean, I am encouraged by, in some ways, even though it's bad for musicians right now, I'm encouraged by things like Pandora and Spotify, where kids or even millennials no longer feel the need to own music, where they're really fine with music as this big commons that you kind of pay into in order to have access to. And for people to think of transportation as a commons, Lyft as a commons. These are, I think these are positive developments. It's just right now the platforms themselves are generally owned by extractive, growth obsessed corporations for whom the commons model doesn't really work. Once they own the whole damn thing, they're not going to want it anymore, because then it becomes a sustainable business. And that's the part that is not consonant with growth-based, VC-based corporate capitalism.
Yeah, you talk about kind of the early idea of the internet being a public commons where anybody can have their website or then their social media page or whatever. It's there for everyone to build their little fiefdom in. Is really not true when you just have 3 or 4 walled, cloud server banks run by Amazon and Google and Microsoft, and everyone is controlled in their walled garden, which or on social media, it's completely, what people can say is now completely controlled by these companies. But I mean, just to circle back a little bit, it's funny you're talking about, maybe autonomous cars aren't the real issue, or thinking back. Buckminster Fuller, of course, said in the 70s that nobody had to work anymore. And it's kind of funny. The paradox of the whole automation debate is people are freaking out about job loss. And it's like, well, wait, take 2 steps back. Why do you want a job? Do you remember how hard people fought to not be dragged out of cities into factories in the Industrial Revolution? When have you ever said, hypothetical people in their, miserable office jobs, when has anyone said, I love getting up in the morning to go do Excel spreadsheets. So, and, you talk about climate change. I mean, the vast human creativity that could be unlocked by freeing people up from meaningless tasks that are really just there to keep them pacified, just like the school system is there to keep people out of trouble. Yeah, I mean, maybe that is the hope. And I think also with, AI, people are quite frightened of AI, I think reasonably, but also, I also think that AI is probably our best chance at solving things like global climate change or finding a cure for cancer and things like this. So,
yeah, assuming that, data is opened up as a commons and not all proprietary and competitive, and they're actually looking for solutions to problems rather than marketable solutions to problems, which are, 2 really different things.
Yeah. I on that note, I have to ask you, just recently you put out an article actually mid last year. You put out this incredible article that I think it was on Medium and in the Atlantic about going to this private resort to deliver this speech to the ultra wealthy people, most of the richest people in the world, who wanted to, if I'm remembering this correctly, wanted your input on how to survive what they saw as the coming catastrophe of civilization. And they were, talking about, well, we need bolt holes in New Zealand. Maybe we can get to Mars. And I really want you to tell this story because you have such a unique you of course have an incredibly unique vantage point on this, but, as being somebody who witnessed this scene that the rest of us can only imagine what that might be like. I'm really curious what your take on that was and what who these people were and what your honest opinion of them was.
Well, I mean, I was invited to this resort and I thought it was to give a talk. I knew it was supposed to be about the digital future. And I thought it was a talk like where you get up and they clip a mic and you speak to a group because it was for a whole lot of money. And it turned out it wasn't. It was they brought these guys into the green room where, and they started asking me these questions about, it started out really, light and easy, like about, what kind of blockchain, Ethereum or Bitcoin, or whether I thought, augmented reality would be a bigger deal than virtual reality. But then they got around finally to asking, their real questions, which were those really dark questions. Do we build our bunker in New Zealand or Alaska? And how are we going to maintain control of our security force after the event because our money won't be worth anything? So they were really scenario planning for these worst case scenarios of the human future. And I guess the thing that I thought of, the weird part was that these guys looked to me like, some of the wealthiest, most powerful people in the world, yet they saw themselves as, so utterly incapable of steering the future, that the best they could do was find out from some futurist dude, what was going to happen and then, prepare for the inevitable collapse. And, what I tried to do is I told them, that they're really playing this kind of insulation game where they're trying to earn enough money so they could insulate themselves from the reality that they're creating by earning money in that way. And that there was a much, easier path, which would just be not trying to insulate themselves, but spending their time and energy and money trying to make the world a place that they wouldn't need to insulate themselves from. But I mean, it didn't really go over well with them. They thought it was kind of naive and I should accept that human nature is so bad and that, they're just guilty. They know everybody hates them because they took all the money. But the other thing was these guys, this was not like Elon Musk or Sergey or something. These were low-level billionaires, guys with just $1 or $2 billion. So they don't have a seat on Elon Musk's flight to Mars. They don't have, access to Ray Kurzweil's brain at Google, to upload themselves. They know in their lifetime, they're going to have to scramble. They still see themselves as, I guess, barely above the middle class in terms of their ability to defend themselves against the catastrophe of their own making.
That's sobering.
It is in a way that they're like, oh, these guys, they watch the zombie TV shows and they do all the same kind of scenario planning gamesmanship. Okay, the zombies are there, so I would go here so I could build this and I could have gun turrets on my barn and solar powered this, but I can't depend on that. It's just like, oh my God, to spend, as a magical thinker, to spend your time safety playing in that way to have these sort of plan Bs is the amount of resources that you need to even do that. I know that the Mormons keep like a year's supply of food in the basement. It's like part of their religion. But I don't know if they were looking at it as like apocalypse as much as sort of like community resiliency and responsibility. So if bad times come, you don't have to depend on, you don't have to drain your neighbor's supply, that everybody has it. It's a mutual agreement, because otherwise everyone's going to be in that Twilight Zone position with all the neighbors banging on your door trying to get into your bomb shelter. So here it's like, if everybody has this, there could be a depression or a tornado storm or something like that. And we're all, we can all hold out until, the next harvest is really, that's sort of a wiser way of understanding it than bomb shelters.
Yeah, I'll never forget, there was an essay or a blog post done by Charles Hugh Smith right after the economic crash in 2008, or maybe it was 2009, where he talks about this idea and this hypothetical, yes, you build your shelter with up in the mountains with all the food you'll ever need and weapons and barbed wire and everything to survive 20 years, and then you break your leg. Okay, now what? Right. And his point being that actually the real survival skill is building resilient networks of human beings. And, I think his point is something like, the more people care about you and know who you are, the safer you are in any situation.
Absolutely. But we're living in a country where we are trained that the way to survive old age is to collect an exorbitant amount of money, is to pull $2 or $3 million out of circulation, out of useful assets, out of the economy, in order to have this nest egg that you could live on completely by yourself when all the young people think that you're absolutely worthless. And that's just so sick. There used to be, and I hate to harken back to the good old times, but there used to be, and there still is in Europe, a culture where the person gets old, and because they've done so much for you, then you take care of them. It's like, duh. And it's just better. It really is. And I know we don't want to smell the pee or whatever, or change a diaper, but man, you'll spend all this money to go to a friggin' Buddhist monastery and get to experience service, carrying buckets around. And it's like the actual opportunity to do service and to experience compassion and to break your ego and is right here all the time. And, we're refusing to do it. And we're all going to die if we don't start.
Interesting. Well, I'm curious, what do you think you mentioned that these people are low-level billionaires, which I can't believe I just said those 3 words in a row. This is our world. What's the jump between low-level billionaires and people like Sergey or Elon Musk or, Ray Kurzweil, these people, or people who have access to Ray Kurzweil, these people that you're talking about? Is there a big change in perspective or mindset? I'm curious where their heads are at, if you have a sense of that.
Yeah, I think the low-level billionaires have hundreds of people who know them and don't, who want money from them. And they understand if they were to give money to everybody, they wouldn't have any left. So they don't have enough, or don't feel they have enough to give back 90% and just have $10 million. They would lose all their cars and yachts and things that way, and their wives would be mad at them. But they do have enough to look up at the next level and think, if only I were Richard Branson or somebody, and then I would have, the spaceships and the and the hot air balloons and the other stuff. You can only do so much with $1 billion, these days.
Okay.
Billion ain't what it used to be.
Oh my God.
But they're also, the guys I spoke to made their money without any creative input. These were guys who got lucky, who had a lucky bet on Wall Street, or who were running hedge funds, or, they were fully aware that they had not actually created anything other than wealth. They and that's different.
They feel bad about that?
Not bad, but they feel they on some level understand that they didn't even allocate capital to businesses that happen to need it. That there actually was no. It's funny. I just talked to a guy the other day who made a few $1 million on Ripple, I guess it was. And I said to him, I said, you understand, there was zero value creation in what you did, right? You know that. And he goes, yeah, I totally get that I made a bet. It was I got someone else's money. That's all that happened.
Mm-hmm.
But that's all they did, right? They did something that allowed them to get someone else's money. And now they're rich because of it. And I think that it's not a guilt or shame, but a fear that comes in because it's so kind of undeserved.
Mm-hmm.
It's that they are afraid that it could be taken away as easily as they got it.
Yeah, that's kind of the scary thing about blockchain too, is that despite all the promise of the technology itself, it really, at least at the present moment, has been just a shell game of how to extract, it's hyper-capitalism in its most abstracted and vicious form in a way, in that people are just trading, promises of something that may exist at some point. I mean, nobody even uses Ripple for the most part. Maybe they're implementing it, but these things are mostly promises of a future that may or may not exist, just like with the first .com boom and bust. So, yeah, and of course that devalues actual work, and actually, business should be a process of doing things for other people that they need, instead of this, algorithmic exercise. So most of your book is focused on things that are going wrong, but of course it does, end on positive notes, and you bring it back to the idea of putting human values into technology, that's really the key, that we have to insist that human values, positive human values, are enfolded into all these new technologies. Instead of being anti-progress, we just need to have some guiding wisdom on these things, which is, that's been true for a long time now. That's been true since the atomic bomb and before. Where do you see not just the hopeful potential, but what can people who are listening to this do tangibly in the world to maybe correctly orient themselves towards having a happy future and having a future that works, instead of dwelling on, the negative side of technology and of the world situation?
I mean, I guess it depends on where in the equation that you want to put yourself, or kind of where you live in the whole system. But I mean, to start, establish real relationships with other human beings. I mean, everything will come out of there. Learn to look at other people in the eye and to actually be in real spaces. When you are going to use a technology to connect, remember that these are drugs, that you're not in total control of your emotional state, and you're not able to establish rapport with the person on the other side. So don't expect your mirror neurons to fire. Don't expect oxytocin to go through your bloodstream. These things aren't going to happen. These are command and control devices, and they're very different. Think of them more as like military apparatus for communications than genuine encounters with other people. But look for those encounters in the real world. So start by sort of reacquainting your nervous system with human social reality. And then, look for ways to participate in whether it's social justice or just mutual aid, doing favors for other people, being available to others, accept favors from other people, learn. If you're a young person, I know this is kind of the hardest for young people now, but try to find, 10 minutes a week that you can just sit with another person without any technology around you. And I don't mean that technology is bad. It's that because the technologies are filled with programs and things that are bad, that are it's the software that's trying to hurt you. Take 10 minutes to be with another person and experience that encounter, where you're not working, where you're not producing or consuming anything, and not mediating your time with that person with anything other than maybe a language, if you want to talk or something. that in itself, that 10 minutes is anathema to corporate capitalism, right? If everyone took 10 minutes a week, that would throw the country probably into a recession all by itself.
Unless Alexa or your Facebook Messenger app is listening to your conversation.
Right. I guess they're monetizing, even if you're silent, then they're monetizing the data that, this is one of those people who's taking 10 minutes away from that. What does that mean? How can we use that data against them? There's no winning on that level. I really think it's as simple as that. Embrace your weirdness, your anomalous behavior, do the unpredictable, and think before you use. We're all users. I get that. We're all in this thing, but think before you use, think before you fly, if you have that kind of money. And I would say, I do think if a genuine Green New Deal is being developed and it's as sort of 360 as it's being talked about, where it's looking at how do our human relationships even impact our ability to sustain the climate, then pretty much anything you do is going to be better than what's happening now. There are going to be plenty of ways, to join a kickball game down the street rather than stream more media or use more air conditioning, and that will pivot this thing towards sustainability.
Awesome. Well, Doug, it was a huge honor, as always, to speak with you. And
an honor to speak with you. I mean, you've gone from fan to scholar, So
thank you.
It's great to be with a disciplined, far-thinking mind.
And that's a great compliment. I really, really appreciate that, Doug. Thank you so much. Where can people find the book, which is doing great, and I hope it keeps doing better and better and better all the time?
Anywhere. I mean, go to teamhuman.fm, and you can see I got my podcast there, and there's all sorts of ways to get involved or read the book or buy the book or whatever. Or go to the library. If you don't have the money, it's okay too.
All right. And you're at rushkoff.com, and the podcast is also Team Human?
My works. Yeah, rushkoff.com and all over the place. Just type Rushkoff into your favorite web browser.
All right. Thanks again so much for being on.
Thank you.
All right. How awesome was that? Huge thank you to Doug for appearing on the show in the middle of his huge whirlwind book tour. The book is called Team Human. You can get it on Amazon. Please leave a great review. And his podcast is also called Team Human. And you can, of course, catch up on everything that he's doing at rushkoff.com. Of course, you can catch up on everything that I'm doing at jasonlouv.com and my school, which is magic.me. That's magick.me. It's all there. Hours and hours and hours of instruction, plus these new extended office hours, and lots more to come. All right. Love you lots. Please make sure to subscribe on iTunes if you haven't already, or let's be honest, if your subscription lapsed because there was a break between shows, please resubscribe so that you are getting the regular updates, and see you real soon. Love you. Bye.